Sarah Chen never expected her routine diplomatic mission to end with her being dragged through an alien prison ship. As Earth's deputy ambassador to the Galactic Concordat, she had attended countless meetings with various species, but the Wrath were different. The crystalline beings had appeared out of nowhere, accusing humanity of stealing forbidden knowledge. Your species' advancement cannot be natural. The Wrath Inquisitor's translated voice reverberated through her cell's force field. Its crystalline body pulsed with angry red light. 10,000 years from stone tools to quantum computing. Impossible. Sarah maintained her diplomatic composure, despite the growing frustration. Convergent development is well documented across multiple species. We learned. We adapted. You stole. The Inquisitor's crystals chimed discordantly. The Council will determine your fate, but until then, you will be contained where your kind's dangerous ingenuity can do no harm. The transport was brief but disorienting. When the stasis field released her, Sarah found herself in a massive circular chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. The walls gleamed with an odd, shifting pattern that made her eyes hurt if she looked too long. "Welcome to the Vault of the Uncontainable," the Wrath Guard announced with what Sarah swore was smugness. "Your new cellmates should keep you occupied." The force field disappeared, and Sarah stepped into the chamber. The guard's crystalline laughter echoed as the entrance sealed behind her, leaving her alone in the vast space. Or so she thought. A human. A voice like liquid mercury seemed to flow through the air. How unexpected. From the shadows emerged a being that defied description. It appeared to be made of living shadow and starlight, its form constantly shifting between solid and gaseous. 2 points of brilliant white light served as eyes. "I am Nexus," the being said, "last of the Void Dancers." "And you are?" "Deputy Ambassador Sarah Chen," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Earth Diplomatic Corps." "I don't suppose you'd care to explain why they call this the Vault of the Uncontainable." A sound like wind through crystal chimes might have been laughter. "Because, dear Ambassador, everyone in here has proven impossible to contain, conventionally. The Wrath created this place for beings they can't control, but can't risk leaving free." Fascinating. Sarah began mentally cataloging everything she could observe about her surroundings. "And how many of us uncontainable beings are there?" "You make 7, came another voice, this one resembling the sound of rustling leaves. A creature that seemed to be made of living plant matter emerged from a corner. Bioluminescent flowers bloomed across its surface. "I am verdant. The Wrath imprisoned me when they discovered my people could communicate across light years through botanical networks." "A pleasure," Sarah nodded. "Though I'm curious why they consider humans so dangerous. We're hardly the most advanced species in the galaxy." "Perhaps," rumbled a third voice, a massive being of what appeared to be pure energy contained within a roughly humanoid form approach. "But your species adapts faster than any in recorded history. I am Pulse, and in my 1,000 years here, I've never seen the Wrath so afraid." Sarah's diplomatic training kicked in. 3 vastly different beings, each with unique abilities, all imprisoned because they represented something the Wrath couldn't control. Her mind began racing with possibilities. "Tell me," she said carefully, "what happens when the Wrath encounter something truly beyond their control?" Nexus's starlight eyes flickered. They panic. Despite their crystalline nature, their responses become increasingly chaotic when faced with the unexpected. "How interesting." Sarah smiled, an expression that would have worried anyone familiar with human nature. "Would you all be interested in a discussion about chaos theory and its practical applications?" The other beings gathered closer, curiosity evident in their various forms of expression. None of them yet realized that the Wrath had just made their biggest mistake. They had given a human diplomat exactly what she needed. An audience ready to listen, allies with unique abilities, and a common enemy who had underestimated them all. Sarah settled in, her mind already formulating plans within plans. "Let me tell you about a human concept called malicious compliance. The Wrath had built the vault of the uncontainable to house beings they couldn't control. They never considered that putting them together might create something even more uncontainable. As Sarah began explaining her ideas, the very walls of the vault seemed to hum with anticipation of what was to come. The next few cycles, Sarah's watch had helpfully converted to local time, were spent learning about her fellow inmates. Each conversation revealed new possibilities, new angles she could work with. She'd always believed understanding was the key to diplomacy. Now it might be the key to their freedom. Your botanical network, Sarah asked Verdant during one of their discussions, watching the patterns of light pulse through their flowering surface. How exactly does it function? We share chemical and electrical signals through root systems that span entire continents. Verdant's flowers shifted to a thoughtful blue. The Wrath feared we could coordinate resistance across their occupied territories. And you, Pulse, Sarah turned to the energy being. Your form, it's pure plasma containment, isn't it? Correct. Pulse's form flickered like a contained lightning storm. My people learned to exist as pure energy, contained by our own electromagnetic fields. The Wrath feared we could interfere with their crystalline technology. Nexus, who had been observing silently, shifted their starlight form closer. You're mapping our capabilities, Ambassador. Planning something. Sarah smiled. Always. But first, what can you tell me about the vault's security systems? The Void Dancer's form rippled. The walls are quantum-locked crystal, designed to resist any single form of attack. The guards rotate every 6 hours. The force fields are triply redundant. Verdant interrupted, their flowers now pulsing red. We've tried everything. Physical force, energy manipulation, even my spores can't penetrate their systems. Everything separately, Sarah noted, her smile growing, but never in combination, never as a coordinated effort. Pulse's form crackled with interest. Explain. Sarah stood, pacing the chamber as she often did while working through complex diplomatic problems. The Wrath built this place to contain beings they couldn't control, but they made a crucial mistake. They assumed that putting us together would make us more manageable, not more dangerous. Because they think linearly, Nexus realized, their starlight eyes brightening. They see combinations as merely additive, not multiplicative. Exactly. Sarah stopped pacing, turning to face her fellow prisoners. They designed systems to counter each of your abilities individually. But they never considered how those abilities might work together, or how they might interact with something completely unexpected. Like human ingenuity, Verdant's flowers shifted to an intrigued purple. More than that. Sarah's eyes gleamed. Human diplomacy. We're not just going to break out. We're going to make them let us out. The others gathered closer as Sarah began outlining her plan. It was audacious, complex, and entirely unexpected. Exactly what the Wrath wouldn't be prepared for. Verdant, your spores can carry information through seemingly solid barriers, correct? At the plant being's affirmative pulse, Sarah continued. And Pulse, you can generate electromagnetic fields of any frequency. Within certain limitations, yes. Nexus, your void dancing. It involves manipulating space-time on a quantum level. The starlight being's form twisted in what Sarah had learned was amusement. You're suggesting we use my quantum manipulation to create gaps in reality, while Pulse generates a field that matches the resonant frequency of the crystal walls. Verdant's flowers began pulsing with excitement. And your spores carried the signal to coordinate it all. Sarah finished. But that's just the beginning. The real key isn't in breaking out. It's in what happens next. She explained the rest of her plan, watching as understanding dawned in their various forms of expression. It was bold, perhaps even crazy, but that was exactly why it might work. The Wrath had imprisoned them because they were uncontainable. It was time to show them exactly what that meant. It's risky, Pulse observed, their form flickering thoughtfully. If any part fails, that's why we need perfect coordination, Sarah acknowledged. And why we need to start now. The guards will be changing soon. That's our chance to begin Phase 1. As her fellow prisoners moved into position, Sarah felt a familiar thrill. The same one she got before major diplomatic negotiations. The Roth had made a serious error in judgment. They thought they were containing the galaxy's most dangerous beings. Instead, they had created the galaxy's most effective team. And they were about to learn that the most dangerous force in the universe wasn't strength or energy, or even the ability to manipulate reality. It was the human talent for bringing people together and turning limitations into advantages. The first guard shift was approaching. Sarah nodded to Verdant, and the plan began to unfold. The vault of the uncontainable was about to live up to its name, just not in any way the Wrath had expected. Phase 1 began with a whisper, literally. Verdant's spores, invisible to the Wrath's crystalline sensors, carried Sarah's instructions throughout the vault. The timing had to be perfect. "Ready?" Sarah whispered to Pulse, who hovered near the chamber's main force field. "Born ready," the energy being hummed, their form condensing into a tighter configuration. "Though I still think this part is unnecessarily theatrical." Sarah grinned. "That's exactly why it'll work." Nexus. The Void Dancer's form rippled in acknowledgement, starlight eyes dimming to barely visible points. In the shadows, Verdant's flowers had shifted to a deep, dormant black, waiting for the signal. The guard rotation began right on schedule. Sarah counted silently as the crystalline beings approached their position. 3, 2, 1. "Oh, great cosmic entities!" She suddenly screamed, causing the guards to freeze in surprise. The voices are back." She threw herself against the force field, pressing her face against it in a display of apparent madness. "They're telling me to count all the quantum particles. 1, 2, skip a few, infinity." The guards' crystalline forms flickered in what Sarah had learned was their expression of confusion. "Perfect. Please," she sobbed dramatically, sliding down the force field. "Make them stop counting. The numbers. They're all wrong." While the guards were distracted by her performance, Verdant's spores were already infiltrating their crystalline structures. The microscopic particles carried specific electromagnetic frequencies, provided by Pulse, that would slowly, but inevitably, begin to influence the guards' thought patterns. "The human appears to be malfunctioning," one guard observed. "Biological entities often do," another responded. "Should we alert medical?" "The numbers, Mason," Sarah shrieked, then immediately bit back a grin at the ancient human reference none of them would understand. "What do they mean?" "Perhaps we should increase the psychological dampeners," the first guard suggested, exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Roth always reached for technological solutions. As the guards adjusted the vault systems, Nexus was using their void dancing abilities to create microscopic quantum fluctuations in reality. Nothing large enough to trigger alarms, but enough to allow verdant spores to spread even further through the facility's crystal architecture. "The dampeners are at maximum," the second guard reported. The human chilled. "Oh," Sarah suddenly said, her voice completely normal. "That's much better. Thank you." The guard's confusion was almost palpable. Sarah had to admit she was enjoying this part more than she probably should. But then, diplomatic training had taught her that sometimes the best way to be underestimated was to appear slightly unstable. After the guards left, Pulse emerged from their hiding spot. Well, that was effective. Nexus interrupted, their starlight eyes twinkling with what might have been amusement. "The spores. Distributed throughout the primary security node," Verdant confirmed, their flowers shifting to a satisfied green. "Phase 1 is complete." Sarah nodded, her theatrical mania replaced by focused determination. "Good. Now comes the tricky part. Pulse, are you ready for Phase 2? The energy being's form crackled. "You realize what you're asking. Even with perfect timing, the energy requirements will be massive." Sarah finished. "That's why we're going to give them exactly what they expect, just not in the way they expect it." She gathered her fellow prisoners closer, lowering her voice although the Wrath's surveillance systems couldn't penetrate their combined countermeasures. The key to this next phase isn't about breaking their systems, it's about making their systems break themselves. Through chaos theory, Nexus observed their form shifting thoughtfully. Small changes, leading to large effects. Verdant's flowers pulsed with understanding. Like my spores. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The Wrath pride themselves on their perfect crystalline order. But that's their weakness. Perfect systems are often the most vulnerable to cascade failures. One small imperfection can shatter the entire structure. Pulse finished, their energy form pulsing with newfound appreciation for the plan. Clever. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. I didn't spend 15 years in diplomatic service without learning how to spot systemic weaknesses. Now let's go over the timing again. When the next shift starts, as she detailed the next phase of their plan, Sarah reflected on the irony of the situation. The Wrath had imprisoned her for fear of humanity's rapid advancement, never realizing that it wasn't technology that made humans dangerous. It was their ability to adapt, to innovate, and most importantly, to bring together disparate forces into something greater than the sum of their parts. The Wrath were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Phase 2 would begin soon, and with it, the real test of their plan. Sarah had made a career out of turning diplomatic disasters into opportunities. Now she just had to do it one more time, with the freedom of 4 species hanging in the balance. Phase 2 began exactly 6 guard rotations after Sarah's performance. By then, Verdant's spores had spread throughout the entire security network, lying dormant in the crystalline architecture like seeds waiting for spring. Control node infiltration at 98%, Verdant reported, their flowers pulsing with suppressed excitement. Ready for activation on your mark. Sarah checked her watch one last time. In diplomatic negotiations, timing was everything. The same principle applied to prison breaks. Pulse, status. The energy being's form had condensed to its smallest possible configuration, conserving power for what was to come. Ready. Though I still think this is going to give me one void of a headache. Nexus. The Void Dancer's starlight eyes flickered. Quantum fluctuations aligned. Though I must admit, using my abilities to create a resonance cascade rather than a direct breach, it's elegantly indirect. That's humans for you, Sarah smiled. Why break down a door when you can convince it to open itself? She took a deep breath, mentally reviewing each component of their plan. The spores were in position. Pulse was ready to generate the electromagnetic pulse that would activate them. Nexus would use their quantum manipulation to ensure the cascade followed exactly the pattern they needed. And Sarah would do what humans did best. Adapt to whatever went wrong. Begin on my mark, she said, watching the security patterns through the distorted walls. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Pulse released their carefully modulated energy wave. To the Wrath's sensors, it would appear as nothing more than a standard power fluctuation, annoying but not alarming. But for Verdant's spores, it was the signal they'd been waiting for. Throughout the facility, microscopic organisms began secreting specific chemicals. Each one alone was harmless. Together, they created a subtle resonance in the crystal balls. First-level response detected, Verdant reported, their flowers shifting through patterns of light. Security systems are attempting to compensate. Let them, Sarah said, watching as events unfolded exactly as she'd predicted. Nexus, start the quantum fluctuations. The Void Dancer's form spread out, becoming almost invisible as they manipulated spacetime at the quantum level. The resonance in the crystals began to change, becoming more complex, more unpredictable. Alarms began to sound, but not the ones the Wrath would expect from a prison break attempt. Instead, their own systems were warning them of increasingly chaotic behavior in the crystal matrices that made up their technology. They're attempting to stabilize the security grid, Pulse reported, their form flickering with effort as they maintained the precise energy frequencies needed. Just as you predicted. Sarah nodded. And what happens when you try to force order onto chaos? The chaos intensifies, Nexus answered, their starlight eyes bright with understanding. Their very attempts to control the situation are making it worse, Verdant finished, their flowers now pulsing in rapid patterns. The cascade is beginning. Throughout the facility, crystal structures began to resonate at frequencies their creators had never intended. The Wrath's attempts to impose order only added new variables to an already chaotic system. Each correction created new instabilities, which required new corrections, which created new instabilities. They're going to realize what's happening soon, Pulse warned, their form crackling with sustained effort. No, Sarah said confidently. They won't, because they're looking for an attack, for someone trying to break their systems. They're not looking for their systems breaking themselves. She was right. The Wrath's responses became increasingly frantic as their perfectly ordered world began to show cracks, literal and metaphorical. But they never realized that the chaos had been orchestrated, that their own predictable responses were part of the plan. Crystalline resonance approaching critical levels, Verdant reported. Their flowers were now strobing with barely contained excitement. Primary security node showing signs of quantum instability. Nexus, prepare for the final phase, Sarah ordered. Pulse, be ready to contain the feedback. We don't want to destroy the facility. Just convince it to let us go. The Void Dancer's form spread further, encompassing the entire chamber. Ready. Though I must say, Ambassador, using chaos theory to engineer a controlled systems failure, it's beautifully human. Sarah allowed herself a small grin. The best diplomatic solutions often involve helping people do what they already want to do. In this case, a massive crystalline groan echoed through the facility as the security systems began to fail in precisely the way Sarah had planned. The Wrath were about to learn another human lesson. Sometimes the most effective revolution wasn't the one that fought the system, but the one that helped the system defeat itself. Phase 2 was nearly complete. Soon would come the real test, not escaping the vault, but ensuring their freedom lasted. But first, they had a facility to liberate, and Sarah had a few more diplomatic tricks up her sleeve. The vault's crystal walls sang with increasing discord as chaos theory did its work. But Sarah knew they had only moments before the Wrath would make their final desperate attempt to restore order. Quantum cascade at critical levels. Nexus reported, their starlight form stretched thin across reality itself. The facility's crystal matrix is approaching total systemic failure. Verdant, status of the guard responses. The plant bean's flowers pulsed rapidly, exactly as you predicted. They're congregating at the primary control node, attempting to stabilize their systems. Sarah nodded. Perfect. Time for the final phase. Pulse. The energy being crackled with anticipation, ready to begin transmission. This was the moment everything hinged on. Sarah had spent her career understanding how species thought, how they reacted under pressure. The Wrath weren't evil. They were afraid. And fear could be negotiated with. Begin broadcast, she commanded. Pulse's form expanded, using the crystalline resonance they'd created to carry their message throughout the facility. Sarah's voice, amplified and clear, reached every corner of the vault. Attention Wrath Security Command. This is Deputy Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth. I'm speaking to you now not as a prisoner, but as a diplomat with a proposition. She paused, letting the words sink in. Verdant spores confirmed the guards had stopped their frantic attempts to restore control, listening. You're currently experiencing a cascade failure in your crystal matrix systems. Your sensors are showing impossible readings, quantum instabilities that shouldn't exist. You're afraid, and I understand why. Throughout the facility, crystal surfaces flickered with the Wrath's agitation, but they were listening. But consider this. We could have used this weakness to destroy your facility. Instead, we're using it to talk. That's the difference you fear in humanity. Not our advancement, but our approach to it. Sarah gestured to her fellow prisoners, each demonstrating their abilities in harmony. Look at what we've achieved here, not through force, but through cooperation, through understanding each other's strengths and working together to create something new. The crystal resonance began to shift, taking on a more harmonious tone as the Wrath's fear response slowly transformed into curiosity. We're offering you a choice, Sarah continued. Continue trying to contain what you don't understand, watching as more and more species achieve what we have, or join us in understanding it. Your crystalline technology, combined with Verdant's organic networks, Pulse's energy manipulation, Nexus's quantum dancing, and humanity's ability to bring it all together. Imagine what we could achieve. The facility's lights flickered as the Wrath processed her words. Sarah pressed her advantage. You imprisoned us because you feared what we might become. I'm showing you what we already are. The question is, are you brave enough to be part of it? For a long moment, silence reigned in the vault. Then, slowly, the crystal walls began to shift, their resonance changing from chaos to harmony. The force fields flickered and died. A group of Wrath officials appeared, their crystalline forms glowing with mixed emotions. The lead figure stepped forward. Ambassador Chen, it chimed, your demonstration has been enlightening. Perhaps there is merit in discussing these matters further. Sarah smiled. I would be honored to begin diplomatic negotiations, though perhaps we could continue this discussion somewhere less restrictive. The Wrath official's crystals chimed with what might have been laughter. Agreed. Though I must ask, how did you know this would work? Because, Sarah said, glancing at her fellow former prisoners with genuine affection, the strongest solutions are never about domination. They're about finding the harmony in discord, the unity in diversity. Humanity didn't advance so quickly because we're special. We advanced because we're good at learning from others and bringing different ideas together. As they were led out of the vault, Nexus drifted close to Sarah. You never intended to break out by force, did you? Breaking out would have solved nothing, Sarah replied. But changing minds, that changes everything. The Wrath had imprisoned them because they feared the combined potential of their abilities. In doing so, they had inadvertently created exactly what they feared, but also exactly what they needed. A demonstration not of power, but of possibility. As they emerged into the starlit expanse of space, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The Wrath had wanted to contain the uncontainable. Instead, they had become part of something even greater, a future where different species worked together, not despite their differences, but because of them. It wasn't the prison break they had expected. It was something far more valuable, the beginning of understanding.